So, nice crowd. Good to see everybody. I'm Bill Phillips, Commodore of the Corinthians, and I had a couple things to say. I want to commend our education committee. They are fabulous. First off, they do like they do like top quality seminars. I mean, some of the best I've ever seen. And what I'm particularly proud of is how relevant they are. I mean, we had the full moon race, which was those who attended 5 miles an hour, that jumped to 25 and 30, before we even hit the first leg. And so, in a matter of 2 weeks, we had a seminar talking about the things that I didn't do, like reap the main, and then also some other, safety kinds of stuff, like if we had lost somebody overboard, do we really know how to do the man overboard maneuver and so on. And so super, super relevant. And I have to say, boy, this one is too. I mean, right now is when we need to be thinking about hurricane preparedness, and bam, the committee is on it, they got it. Thanks, committee, and that applause was well deserved. I have something that the social committee has been working on. I think I'd like to say, since I'm a part of it, that we do really good parties, and we have another really good party coming up on August the 12th. It's our summer party, and it's going to be right here, and we're going to have music by Three Blind Mice. They are a kick-ass band. I mean, y'all, I'm looking at the ages of y'all out there. Y'all gonna love this band. This band can do anything, but they're gonna do songs that you want to hear, and maybe even you want to dance to. We're gonna have food by Sweet Olive, which our former manager here left us, and now we'll get to see her because she's gonna cater for us, and it's gonna be great. And then Hooper and Tiffany are going to be in charge of a sailing trivia. I think that's going to be a hoot. And there are prizes and all kinds of stuff. So register now. You can get online. Members, register before August the 5th, because we want to make sure that we sold out last year. So we're going to take care of our members first. So get online. It says Corinthians.org right here. As soon as you can, and register, so we'll have you in. And members 25, non-members 35. After the August the 5th, we'll be inviting all the non-members to join us. So, thank you. That applause was for the party, not for me.
All right. Thank you, Bill. We have a pretty packed agenda, and we're going to be moving through it as smartly as we can. The agenda is shown up here. We were going to start with a briefing by Brian Whitted from the New Orleans Municipal Yacht Harbor, and then we'll be talking about creating a hurricane plan. Gerald made a comment by email earlier today. His insurance, GEICO, is now requiring a hurricane plan. And sure enough, we have one embedded in this presentation. And that's thanks to Manette Burns. Not that GEICO requires a hurricane plan, but that the information related to that comes from Manette, who's unfortunately unable to join us because she's involved in a survey of a boat they're looking at. We also made contact with an individual by the name of Michael Liebert, who has taught at the New Orleans Yacht Club several years about hurricane preparedness, has a lengthy experience as a professional mariner and a recreational sailor, and we've taken his material and incorporated it into our presentation, and thanks to Michael for that. We should have an individual, Larry Strauss. Is he here? Very good. Outstanding. Who's going to be preparing some information related to Prieto Marina, and we've also invited Todd Whitley from Punch Train Yacht Works, who's graced us by showing up and giving us a little bit of an insight into post-hurricane issues and work. So with that, Are you going, Adele, are you going to transfer presenter status to Brian and let him take over?
Good afternoon, I'm Brian Whited, the Executive Director of the New Orleans Municipal Yacht Harbor Management Corporation. We're, like I said, we're a public benefit corporation for the city of New Orleans, so we're quasi-public, mostly public, but we do get to do a little bit more. So I can go over a few things about what we do for hurricane preparedness at the marina. So, please, let's go ahead and get started. As many of you know, the hurricane season starts from June 1st to November 30th, and it definitely goes that long. Remember, I think Zeta happens on Halloween or close to it. Can happen. So activity between mid-August and mid-October, and then we actually start sending out preparedness emails usually in mid-May. We have a hurricane plan for our tenants that's required. That only goes, the requirement only goes into effect during a actual hurricane watch. So tropical storm warnings, watches, we don't enforce the hurricane, but if we're getting a hurricane watch with those kind of wind conditions, we will actually go out and confirm that the boats are ready and then do our own work on them if they're not. That there's 3 phases that we use for hurricane preparedness. Each one requires different things. So certainly we start with vessel preparation, then location preparation, which is just the area around the vessel, and the mooring preparation plan. So you can go to the next slide. This is probably one of the most important things that we do or ask our tenants to do is to just strip the boat of all the windage and movable equipment. Mostly just get the canvas, any outriggers on sport fishermen down, sails removed, take it off the boat or put down below, dinghies, cushions, those usually end up all over the place. Any boxes on deck, biminies, roller furling sails. I know it's a pain to take those roller furling sails down, but every time we've lost a mast in the harbor during a hurricane or a tropical storm, they've had their sails up. So that absolutely tells me that if you leave your sails up, the risks of your mast coming down are much greater. Certainly doesn't happen to everybody, but it's not a risk I would take. And then other items to do is tie down everything you can't remove. Pillars, wheels, lock everything in place. And then finally, just make sure the vessel has a fully charged battery and your bilge pumps are in operation. You know, sometimes we get lots of rain. It's important to make sure your bilge pumps keeping your boat dry. So next slide. Location prep. It's a little different for everybody. For marina, we have pretty strict rules, although they get bent a little bit. But you want to make sure you clear all the belongings on the docks around the vessel. We have dock boxes that are fixed. We still lost a couple. So make sure everything around the boat is tight, screwed down. Anything that isn't screwed down, you got to get rid of it. And another thing that we do is make sure all the lids on the dock boxes are closed, secured in some way, because we lose lids. The wind grabs them and tears them off. A big one to think about, just in general, is any fuels or hazardous materials. People leave jerry cans out. You need to make sure that those are away, preferably taken away from the water completely. And then another last one is gang. Get rid of those. Those can become flying projectiles, and they're not good for anything. Go ahead. Lots and lots of ways to tie up a boat. Even the email that went out had some good resources. These are some good resources. Boat US has some great stuff. Just briefly, if you can trailer your boat, get it out of the water. It's on a lift, get it out of the water. If you have a haul out, you can haul it out, secure it with jack stands, extra stands, and strap to the ground. That's by far the most effective way to protect a boat. Otherwise, if you have a hurricane hole or somewhere to go inland, bring it up, tie it with anchors on shore, spider web it. Lots of different ways to do that. When I was much younger, our family boat was tied in the middle of a reverse cul-de-sac in Eden Isles during one of the tropical storms or hurricanes with very long lines, and it just went up and down with no issues. So it's a great way to do it if you have room. And then otherwise, like me, we have the floating piers, fixed piers, and floating piers have different methods to secure the boat. But they share some similarities. You can go to the next one, I can review those. So floating docks. Floating docks are a little different. Our floating docks, we allow the boats to stay. There's not really many places to go, so we usually actually get extras. But we do require to use appropriate lines or bigger. The cleats on our docks are very large, so they are not an area of concern for us. We always want people to double or add additional lines. I have a requirement of 7. Certainly people can use more than that. And we want to remind people, just specifically to our docks, we use both cleats at the end, one on each side of the finger pier. The only dock damage that we've seen is from vessels pulling the cleats out of the pier, all of which have had sails up, by the way. So that's another reason to take your sails down. And then just floating docks act like one big unit. So you want to tie the boats together tightly, tie to your neighbor if you have permission. You want to get everything as tight and solid as you can. Use lots of fenders. That way they all go up and down. There's not as much shock loading and everything goes away. We have steel pilings that the docks ride up on, and we have some wood pilings in the middle of some of the slips. The wood pilings we don't allow people to tie to because it's likely when the docks go up, those won't, and it'll start pulling pulling on the piers in a way they weren't designed. So the engineers that designed it said don't tie to those. There are some methods people use floating or rolling items on those piers. This can work in some areas, but we don't have any kind of in place to vet them, so we just don't allow it at all. The item to remember is just cover all chafe points. Lots of different ways to do that, lots of fenders. And then something that people don't always remember, and I see a lot, is people tying a lot of lines to one cleat on a vessel. There's no reason to do that. There's lots of places you can tie, especially sailboats. You can tie to winches around the mast, to windlass capstans, lots of different pad eyes, shrouds, anywhere that's really strong on the boat, you can tie to. So, go ahead, next slide. This is the diagram that I made.
I have a, we're doing some construction on the front porch. I have a box on the steps.
Let's see, we can mute somebody.
What's that? Yeah. Yeah, it says mail.
He's got an open mic. Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Yep.
This is the diagram I made. I use paint, by the way, so appreciate it. This one shows basically just a variety of methods to tie up boats in our marina. Like I said, we do a minimum of 7 lines. You can certainly use more, but you can see, I don't know, the end of the finger piers, I like to have each boat go to both piers. Cleats on one, that just spreads the load out. Mostly you just want to make sure you use lots of lines to keep the boats from going into the piers. And then if you don't have a place to tie it, if you lose a line where the boat will slide out a little bit, it's less of an issue. But like I said, floating docks, tight, doubled, and lots of extra lines. Go ahead, next slide, please. Stock mooring is a little bit different. Water level changes change the whole kind of idea of how you do it. So you still want to use that, lots of extra lines, double additional lines. You can attach lines to neighbor slips, permitted, because you're going to need a lot of length to handle the surge. The longer the line, the better. If it's long, you can keep it a little bit tighter. Again, lots of chafe points when you're doing fixed dock mooring. The lines tend to ride up and down on lots of different issues. So you want to protect all those lines, install fenders, and then the same thing. Don't do too many lines to one cleat on a vessel. Use lots of the other options. Go to the next slide. Like I said, this is stolen from a professional illustrator from Boat US. Looks a lot nicer, similar ideas. You can see very long lines. Those will allow the boats to go up and down. And then slack, I've seen lots of people use long lines. They'll be pretty tight and then just keep shorter slack lines to give an extra protection, so at least the boat won't float away if something breaks. Go ahead, next slide. And then our policy on access during hurricanes, it's a little bit unusual for us. We're behind the flood wall, so the levee board closes the flood protection wall, which makes it so you could walk into the marina. We definitely don't recommend it. I've heard lots of stories of tenants walking in and seeing alligators and things closer to them than you would think. So we recommend absolutely not being near the boat. Some people say, should you stay aboard a boat? Absolutely, we say do not do it. It's not worth your life. I know people do it, but we don't recommend it. Typically, I actually leave certain areas of the harbor open during hurricanes, so anybody that does stay can get out to high land or a high built concrete building if they needed to. So I don't recommend that at all, but people do it. Yeah, I think that might. These are just sources I've used. Boat US, good source. The NHC is the National Hurricane Center at NOAA, gives you lots of information about the storms themselves. And then we have our hurricane plan, if anybody's interested in reading it specifically, is on our own website, New Orleans Municipal Yacht Harbor. Next slide. So, thank you. I'll be happy to take questions. You can do them in the chat.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Well, let me know if my email's on here. Like I said, if any of y'all have any questions, you can give me a call or shoot me an email. Happy to answer.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, the next section is actually from Manette Burns, and it's about the hurricane preparedness plan. And, it's kind of like the advertisement for the insurance. It says it's all about the 3 Ps. It's all around preparation. And waiting until there's an impending storm is simply too late. You need to create the hurricane plan before you have to be challenged to use it. And so in creating a hurricane plan, when do you want to create it? You want to create it now. You want to do it before there's a storm. Developing the plan, you need to start looking at some references. Some of them are your insurance. Your insurance may have a requirement that you do specific things. For example, apparently on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, there are several insurance requirements that actually say you have to haul out. There are some marina contracts, your docking contract. Apparently, again, in some portions of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, there's a requirement to vacate the marina during an impending named storm arrival. Your particular boat, what can you do with your boat? Is it in the process of having maintenance done? Does it have to be towed somewhere? That'll make a decision that you're going to stay where you are if you can't actually take the vessel somewhere. Do you have anything that you need to do on the boat as part of the preparation to make sure you can survive the storm? And then there's a question of the anticipated storm itself, the strength, the movement, the directions. We'll talk a little bit about that. I have a personal example of a very low wind event of a high storm surge event that has some interesting activities. And alternative places to keep your boat, either in the water or on the hard. And I think Todd may speak at some point about a little bit of the dichotomy of, is going on the hard a better deal than staying in the water? And we've had this discussion, and there's pluses and minuses on both ends of that. But the other piece to it is that if you are in the northern portion of Lake Pontchartrain on Bayou Castine, you essentially are in a hurricane hole. You're in a place for storage. There are a lot of people who maintain slips in my marina and actually keep the boat in Mississippi, but they maintain a slip 12 months out of the year so they can come back and put their boat in this bayou for some protection. One thing that I want to point out on any plan that you have, there is no absolute guaranteed, if you do this, you won't get any damage. That's just not going to happen. That's why they're called natural disasters. The emphasis word is the disaster part. You can mitigate some of your risk, but you can never get rid of all of it, and that's an important component of that. So when you develop your plan, you've got to kind of consider a lot of different things. And the terrain and the kind of hydrology of the local area is going to affect the impacts of various storms. So insurance, where is your policy? Can you put your hand on it? Is it available electronically in case it's lost in paper? And then other documents, things like your state registration, your documentation, your marina contract. You need to know where those are and have them available to you. State registration and documentation you keep on board the boat, but you should keep a Xerox copy of it available or electronically stored so that you actually have reference to it in case the boat goes missing. And you actually have to genuinely say, yeah, but this is me, I own this thing, by that hull identification number. Are those documents up to date? What do they include or exclude? Some policies are going to exclude certain kinds of risks. Some marina contracts are going to prohibit or exclude some sort of action on your part. You need to make sure. Can you access them electronically if you have to evacuate? And does it cover your vessel in the latitude in which it's currently docked or moored? We all have insurance policies that have some limitations as to the area that the boat can be. If you're up in the Northeast and you're now down in Florida and a hurricane is coming, you need to find out if you're actually covered for your particular area and make the necessary adjustments. And does it require you to be hauled out on the hard or in order to cover any damage to the boat or to its surroundings? I used to sail on the Chesapeake, and I was at a marina that had about 450 slips and about 1,500 on the hard locations where people could put their boat. Yes?
What does that mean?
On the hard means when the boat is actually on land, on stands, like at a working yard, like Pontchartrain Yacht Works, when they take a boat out, put it on the ground, and haul it out with the travel lift, put it on stands, and then the boat is stable in that position. In this particular marina that I was in, there were about 1,500 haul out spots. About 900 were occupied. When a big name storm came, anybody who had any money pulled their boat out of the water and put it on the hard. That was the kind of the cultural expectation there. Here, we don't have that many places to go where we can do that, okay? We normally keep our boats in the water year round. So, where will your boat be for the storm? Can the boat remain in its current slip, or do you have to move it? Do you have to move it on the basis of your contract with your marina? Is there a nearby canal, river, or bayou that you could use? Again, thinking about Bayou Castine, it is a bayou. It really is a hurricane hole to go place boats, and people are going to be bringing their boats to a place like Bayou Castine if they're out in the open. Do you need to keep a hurricane slip? 2 slips away from me in Prieto is a gentleman who has a very nice boat that he keeps in Pass Christian, and he maintains a slip 12 months out of the year so he can come over and deposit his boat when he needs to. Does it have to be hauled out or on the hard by the insurance mandate? If so, do you have a standing contract, or do you have to make an appointment, and is it first come, first served? You try to make that decision at the last moment, you're likely not going to be served. So what are the expected hazards? Well, they come in a lot of different flavors. Wind velocity, obviously, storm surge, waves, tides heightened by rainfall flooding, tornadoes, water spouts, loss of electrical power, and I just put in other there because we don't know what other things might be. Lightning might be a challenge, hail might be a challenge under certain kinds of storms. There's all sorts of possibilities. The key is to understand what you're preparing for. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about my experience in Hurricane Isabel. But you need to start looking at these hazards as you start seeing the storm coming toward you as to what you're going to actually have to be dealing with. In the case of my experience in Hurricane Isabel in the Chesapeake, wind velocity was not an issue, but the storm surge was. And being able to separate those two and understand what needed to be done for each of those was actually pretty important to understanding what to do. So, make your own checklist. In addition to the things that are in the sample hurricane plan, which is on the next 2 slides, and it's accessible by this link, if hurricane checklist, consider doubling the dock lines, tying your dock lines in such a way that it's easy for someone on the dock to adjust your lines. So if someone is out there and sees your boat in trouble, that they can actually adjust the lines from the dock side. They don't have to get on the boat to do it, assuming that such a good Samaritan even exists. But the point is, if you're all set up that all of your lines are on the boat end for adjustment, sorry, you've sealed the deal. As soon as you walk away from the boat, no one's going to be adjusting any lines. So even if someone sees something they don't like and it's still safe for them to go out and deal with it, good luck, that may not happen. Cover any sharp edges on the docks or posts. If you take a look at any one of our pilings in typical marina, it's just covered with big splinters, nails, all sorts of things, people hanging grab bars and all that kind of stuff on the piling. And who knows what that's going to do to a dock line that's going to be under a lot of load and possibly abraded. So the next few pages, or 2 pages, are actually the sample hurricane plan submitted by Manette and Thomas Burns, their Louisiana Sailing School, to their insurance. It's basically, this kind of outlines what to do. And I'm not going to read it through line by line, but it's basically around getting rid of the sails, getting rid of anything that might have some windage, biminis, anything related to deck canvas, the bimini frame itself tied down, things like poles, downwind poles on your boat. Those need to be removed or lashed to the deck so they don't become a projectile.
I have
Yes,
a question. When you say doubling of the lines, same tension on both lines?
Yes, so the idea is you're trying to provide more ability to carry, the ability to carry more load. So if you have one loose and one tight, well, you're just gonna break one and then now subject the second one to that load. So what you're doing is the difference between parallel and series. So if you're gonna do it in parallel, then they're both the same tension. If you're expecting one to break and the second one to be the backup, then in fact, yes, you want one with less tension. One of the things of interest, after you've taken all the sails off, what about the halyards? What do you do with those? And the argument here is actually put those up against the mast and tape them to them. Wrap a few rolls of duct tape or wraps of duct tape on those. Get any undeployed anchor off the boat, because again, it's possible for it to be moved and possible to cause damage to your boat. And then you can see all the rest of this. Any opportunity for water to get in the boat, again, these events are going to be high rainfall events, and you can expect that to cause a significant amount of risk of water ingress. I had 134 in Clearly during Hurricane Harvey. I was living in Houston, of all places, and the deal is my boat did fine. It was on a floating dock with about a 12-foot throw. We had a big storm surge, about 7 or 8 feet or so, but that was a long-term rainfall event. And my boat got a bunch of water in it, and my bilge pump failed. Fortunately, somebody in a nearby boat saw that and actually went and pumped out my boat before it got out of hand. So the point is any place that there's an opportunity for water to get into the boat, you want to see what you can do to keep that from happening. And again, just make sure that hatches and ports are secured, and ensure that nothing is left on deck which could fly loose. Here's the second page of that plan. Again, I'm not going to read through everything. It's all around the idea of making sure that the systems on the boat work. So for example, if you have scupper drains in your cockpit, they need to be clear, okay? If you are next to a bunch of trees, there's a big risk of getting leaves in the cockpit, and that'll block the scupper drains. And if the cockpit fills with water, that water will end up in the cabin of the boat. So it's imperative that you keep those drains open. And if you can, you may need to actually put a screen on top of it, domed up, so that you can still get water flow through it. Again, I wouldn't want to try to figure that out, Saturday evening with a Sunday morning arrival of a storm. It'd be worthwhile to figure out, how do I protect that scupper drain from getting contamination blocking it? Batteries and bilge pumps. Obviously, we want the batteries fully charged. We want to check the bilge pumps. We want to make sure they actually work. Check the actual float switch. Don't just turn the switch on and see if it runs. Check the float switch to actually see that it genuinely does what it's supposed to do. Every once in a while, I actually take a hose squirt some water in my bilge and see if I can make the float rise on the basis of water. If I reach out with my finger and pull the float up, great. That's fine if the hurricane causes a finger to go into my bilge and pull the little lever up, okay? That's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is water filling it up. So I occasionally do that every once in a while, like about once a year actually. Anyway, putting out as many fenders as you possibly can, avoiding too much tension on lines like electrical cords. As long as you have electrical power, you're going to be recharging batteries, so you need to have enough scope of that electrical cord that the boat can move around vertically as well as horizontally and still receive power. And again, actually, if it goes taut, it's going to end up damaging your electrical connection on the boat and or the box on the dock. This item about putting out an anchor, I did that in Hurricane Isabel and it worked. I put out my anchor and about 50 feet of road and figured if the dock goes away, the boat won't go far, you know? And it happened that was a pretty prudent thing. Big question about whether you want to leave a key in the engine switch so that someone else can board the boat and start it. And if so, you want to leave the water intake for the raw water intake for your cooling system open, but I would suggest you close all the other seacogs on the boat. You have to make a decision about that. I mean, if the boat ends up having to be started and operated by a person that you're not familiar with in order to, in some form, keep the boat from having any further damage, it's your call. Leave contact information on the boat. The boat may go away and you may not see it for a while. It'd be really good to have your name, phone number, email address, that kind of thing, on a poster or a placard taped to the inside of a window on the boat, so that somebody can stand outside and say, oh yeah, that boat belongs to Hooper Harris, and this is his phone number, and here's his email address. Hey Hooper, I found your boat. You know, it's in Macomb, Mississippi. Okay? it's now a lawn ornament. So this is just some really good information. Again, it's in your handout as well as the slide pack, by all means. So let's take a look at what goes on in a hurricane. So these are some pictures that Thomas and Manette put together. So the picture on the left-hand side shows the a shoreline, actually this shoreline right here, prior to a storm. If you notice the erosion of land as well as vegetation, and that has occurred in these two photos. That gives you a sense of the kind of power involved in a storm. Obviously, you know, we're in southern Louisiana, we know how this stuff works. And we can go from that very docile appearance to this rather frightful one. This is Thomas, and if you'll notice, he's on a floating dock and you can see a sign with an arrow pointed to it. That sign is way up here. So, and in reality, Thomas only stands about that high relative to the sign. At least Manette said so. And she would know, right? So the point of all this is that there's going to be movement. And the storm surge, there's Thomas standing next to the floating dock piling. And then this actually is their experience. This is in Mayport near Jacksonville. And this is the boat that they were moving, delivering. And basically they said that even though it was on a floating dock, the problem was there was so much hobby horsing of the boat, the fenders kept popping out, and they spent most of their, the entire storm pushing the boat off of the dock, shoving the fenders back down to keep it from being beat up. So it's it can be a mess even on a floating dock. So the prediction for the storm that they were dealing with was this particular storm that went into central Florida. They were up in this area, which was well after landfall, and as we all know on hurricanes, the strongest winds and highest storm surge typically are on the right side of the storm as the storm approaches. If we look at a standard Mercator map like this, north up type of map. And the argument behind this is it has to do with the rotation within the storm And the ability of the southerly flow of high winds from the south, carrying a lot of moisture, which is a lot of energy, but also being able to carry a lot of rain. And the winds that were experienced this is a screenshot off of Mayport, was again near Jacksonville, during the storm. At one point at 0900 hours, 9 o'clock in the morning, they had a 38 knot sustained wind max gust of 62 knots. They experienced a 74 knot gust on their wind instrument. So why did that happen? It happens because wind goes up the higher you go away from the surface, and the wind actually increases because of the reduction in surface friction. We'll talk a little bit about that because it becomes pretty important when we start talking about how we prepare the boat for a hurricane in terms of getting sails off the boat. So when we're mooring a boat, and this is again from Michael, I believe his name is Leapart. When mooring a boat, what we're trying to do is limit the movement of the boat in our slip. And we're concerned with a lot of different forces. Tide, wind, waves, surge, and current are the primary forces we're concerned about. Now, the forces that we're talking about are huge. We sit out here with a 5 or 10 knot breeze, and then one day we get a 20 knot breeze, and there's a lot more tension on the lines, isn't it, when we have a higher wind like that. Basically what happens is, as you increase the speed of the force, wind, current, whatever the case might be, the increase in that force is proportional to the square of the speed. In other words, if we did go from 30 knot wind to a 60 knot wind, it's a 4 times increase in the amount of load, okay, that is experienced on the boat. If there's a 1 knot increase, 1 knot current that goes to a 3 knot current, you gotta think, well, that's not much, right? It's 9 times the force, just in that change of 2 knots. And that's because, again, as we increase the speed of these forces, we end up with having to square that speed difference to understand the amount of force involved. What it really boils down to, just to put this in something visual, if it takes 1 pound of force to pull a boat or to hold a boat in a 1 knot wind, in a 100 knot wind, it'll be 10,000 pounds of force. It just keeps going up, and it's not linear, okay? It goes up by the square. So these forces get pretty outrageous once we start dealing with hurricane level winds. So the wind changes, as I mentioned, related to the height above the surface. When you go and listen to the weather reports from the National Weather Service, they utilize a standard which is 1.5 meters above the surface, about 5 feet above the surface, about right here. So if you have a wind of 6 feet above the surface of 30 knots, you can expect 30 feet to see as high as 60 knots. That's doubling the speed, quadrupling the force. If you don't like the force that's in your face, it's 4 times as high at the top of 30 feet. If you're between 30 and 90 feet, like typical mast that we might have, then you're looking at somewhere between 60 and 75 knots of wind force. And again, as you go above the 30 knot value, the force increases by the square. So this is why it's pretty important to get rid of that roller furling head sail. Yes, you can put 15 wraps on it of the sheets, but that's only at the middle of the sail. Okay, the top of the sail, which is exposed to all this high wind, is just sitting there with a little flap on it. Okay, and what is the sail designed to do? It's designed to take wind energy and create motion out of it. Good luck with that. Okay, if you have a high velocity, that increase in velocity as you go up. So that's why it's important to get rid of the roller furling head sail as soon as you start to see that you're at risk of a high wind. Minette and I talked about this. If it's a category, above category 2 rather, you should be pulling your roller furling head sail off. If it's above a category 1 and you think there might be a heavy duty gust, you need to do it. If you have old sails like mine that don't lay as flat as they might if they were brand new, yeah, maybe we pull it off at a category 1. It only takes a few minutes, and all you have to do, if you want a diorama of how this works out if you don't do it, go to JSBB Marina, okay? Go to JSBB Marina, you will see everything you need to understand about excessive loads on roller furling sails. So let's talk a little bit about boat length versus mooring line diameter. This is a general rule of thumb. 20 feet and under, you get away with 1/2 inch mooring lines, 5/8 inch for 20 to 40 feet, over 43, up to 60 feet, 3/4 inch. A lot of people say, hey, you've got a 20-foot boat, I'm gonna get my 3/4 inch rope, I'm gonna be all set. Excellent. The problem is you're probably gonna end up pulling the cleat out of your boat because you have to allow the line to stretch. There has to be some shock absorbing going on. So if you have a 20-foot boat, you put a 3/4 inch line on it, you're right, the line's not gonna go anywhere, but the boat might, because it'll separate, you'll overload the cleat. If you've got an older boat, you know, we all know the horror stories of decks and water intrusion and all this kind of stuff like this. This is where you're gonna end up seeing damage to the boat if you have excessive mooring lines size. When we talk about lines, we have to always remember that knots and splices typically reduce the strength of the line. Interestingly enough, an I-splice reduces it only 5 to 10%. The bowline, the common sailor's knot, 40% reduction. So you only get 60% of the advertised breaking strength of your line. So generally, what we're after here is that using knots is going to reduce the strength of the line. So think about how we would tie up to a piling, for example. If we went to the piling and wrapped around the piling 3 or 4 times and then set a knot, what we're doing is we're letting the friction of the line on the piling restrain the boat. We're not asking the knot to do it. All we're asking the knot to do is tidy up the back end of the line, right? Just tidy up the end of the line so it doesn't unravel and doesn't unwind itself. And the idea behind this is to start thinking, trying to outsmart the physics that you're going to be faced with. If you don't want your lines to be reduced in strength, then don't let the knot be the load-bearing component of the line. Let the line's friction on the piling be the load-bearing. Using a cleat clearly provides for a very small loss of strength, although there will be some because that's a form of a knot. It just happens to be on a particular structure. So there's this concept that says that if you have a synthetic line and you stretch it to 70% of its breaking strength, you have probably permanently damaged it, meaning that there will be filaments in it that are elongated or possibly even broken, and the strength of the line is going to be reduced. So if you have a storm over, say, a Category 2, and you've been using dock lines to hold the boat in place, you come back out to the boat and you're happy that everything's good, don't ever use those dock lines again in a hurricane, okay? They're just done. Retire them from that service. You can use them for a lot of other things, like tying up here to Pontchartrain Yacht Club when you want to come to the skipper's meeting for a race, something like that. They can be your auxiliary backup, low impact dock lines. But don't reuse them again because you're fooling yourself with the level of strength. If the line is stretched to 80%, it's likely to fail without warning, which is scary as all get out. And I have 2 very short videos. Speaking, the first one was of a large cargo vessel that got loose at a mooring, and the lines are stretched to the point that they break. And what's interesting is I found some technical data on this. The particular line involved was some big giant thing by our standards, and the load was outrageously high. However, the laboratory that did the analysis of this determined that the rope achieved 715 miles per hour
Oh, yeah.
in the snap.
Wow.
It basically went supersonic, okay?
Wow.
The other one was of a gentleman on a boat in a lock, and the lock the water starts to go down and the boat goes down, a line gets caught, and it suddenly snaps. Now it doesn't, let me rephrase it, it twangs like a bowstring. It gets released under tension, and it doesn't break, but the speed at which it moves and the velocity and the force involved, it manages to hit this guy in the head and knock him unconscious. So it's heavy duty stuff. So understanding what goes on with
What's the
with the
rule of
lines.
thumb,
It's important.
what's the rule of thumb on dock lines and replacing lines because of UV damage? Is there a lifespan that?
I'm sure there is, and I don't know that I have any data on that, but I would suspect you could go to somebody, well, West Marine is going to advise you to replace your lines immediately. Okay? And they'll also advise you to do it when it's not on sale. But the point is, I bet you could go to New England Ropes website, and they're a common producer, and just get a sense of what they require. So what we have here is my own personal story. This is a Columbia Contender 24-foot boat made in 1965. I bought it for $500. I sold it for $500. It's what they call Karma, okay? This was my first keel boat. I had a couple of smaller sunfish kind of boats before that. This is in Hurricane Isabel in the Chesapeake in 2003. The boat's name is Tabasco. It was moored at a place called Harrington Harbor North. The mooring arrangement at Harrington Harbor was really a four-poster, two tall pilings in the back, two tall pilings in the front, and these little small pilings on the side where electrical power connected and all that good stuff. The projected path of Hurricane Isabel was right up the East Coast, and if you want to take a look, this is the Chesapeake, this is where Deal, Maryland is, just south of Annapolis, where our friend Skipper just came back from. So if we were to look at this hurricane, when it made landfall in North Carolina, and as it made landfall, it lost an awful lot of energy and worked its way northward. As a matter of fact, it was a Category 5 hurricane out in the Atlantic. By the time it made landfall, it was a Category 2 hurricane. It's Category 2. I mean, we're from Louisiana, right? Hey, come on now. You know, we second reef and off we go, right? So the deal is that Hurricane Isabel was just really a lightweight hurricane in terms of wind. Except for the fact that all this water gets pumped into the Chesapeake, which is this big giant V-shaped thing. And all the water that is dumped on top of the Delmarva Peninsula drains into the Chesapeake. So you get water coming from the sky and you get water coming up from the Atlantic Ocean. So pretty impressive. So if you want to, again, kind of figure out where I was, that was where I was, right there in this place where there was going to be this advancing heavy rainfall, high wind, high storm surge coming. This is a little picture of Tabasco sitting in the slip. This is kind of a stylized view of what the boat looked like. Sitting in the slip, we had a couple pilings. This is a typical mooring arrangement. A couple of lines going to cleats on the side of the boat. You know, it looks pretty normal, right? So we were told that there was going to be an 8-foot storm surge. So I got to thinking, what is that going to look like? And my concern was, well, the boat's going to go up 8 feet. So how am I going to keep this boat somehow contained in this slip? And what I did was I took the dock lines, and I'm not recommending this as the school solution for everything, but it's a kind of, you got to think a little bit out of the box to come up with the answer to deal with the physics of the storm you're going to be faced with. This is how I dealt with this one. By the way, highly successfully. I thought, well, boat's going to go up 8 feet. What I ought to do is run the lines up, the pilings, nail them in 4 feet above the deck and cleat level on my boat. Why 4 feet above? Well, I wanted the boat to be somewhat restrained here, and I wanted it to be restrained here. Now the in-between, I can't do anything about that. I'm not going to be there, I'm not adjusting lines, I don't have tensioners on it, it's just going to be the way it is. But what I wanted to do was be able to have my boat not get held underwater by the dock lines, and not so loose that it just banged around everywhere when it was at normal water level and when it was at high water level. And so what I ended up doing was putting those lines up, as I mentioned, but the other thing that I did was I ran the dock lines across the boat. So the line that was over here on the starboard side, I ran over to the port cleat across the top of the boat. You wonder, why did he do that? It allowed for the ability of the boat to roll slightly if there was a sudden shock by some force of either current or of wind. I've got a little picture that explains that. You can see the 8-foot storm surge, and basically what I did was, I simply had my boat set up, both at the high water and low water level, to be restrained within the slip. Not tightly, a little bit of slack, obviously, and I cheated. I actually went up about 4.5 feet, assuming, hey, maybe they missed it, it's a 9-foot storm surge. Okay, but I gave myself a little bit of help there. In between, I didn't have any control of what the boat did. But I did have control at high water and low water. The business about running the line across to the other side is when you get a sudden shock on the line, the boat is sitting in position, it's pushed to the side, and that line comes taut quickly, the load goes up dramatically, very, very quickly, a sharp-edged load onto the line, and it's very damaging to the line. What I did by putting the line across, and I've kind of symbolically shown the port line going across over to the starboard cleat, was what I did was I caused the boat to roll a little bit. That rolling picked up some of the load. It took the load off of the line. The load of the shock of the boat moving laterally was absorbed by both the line and the boat. I got that actually by flying sailplanes. I'll tell the story some other time. But basically, it reduced the shock load on the boat, and that was really a cool deal. As a matter of fact, you got to look out for rub points when you do this method, but the point is that it allows the boat to deal with the physics that you're going to be faced with. I also did something that everybody tells you, oh, don't ever do this with a life preserver. Well, my boat was full of these nasty, mildew-covered, kapok-filled life preservers. We've all seen them. We don't know what to do with them, right? Okay, they're just in every boat. Well, a lot of boats, okay? I must have had 10 of these things on the boat. They were awful. As far as I was concerned, if you were wearing one of these, you're going to the bottom, okay? Because they're all just full of water, okay? I took each one of these and I put it on my lifeline stanchions. I made fenders out of them, sacrificial fenders. It looked crazy. My $500 boat on a nice, beautiful pier with Halberg Rassies and a Golden Hind and every kind of Benettos and every kind of nice boat you can think of, up and down this line. Mine was the $500 boat that somebody had painted with house paint. Okay, not me. I didn't want to touch it. It had lead in it. But the point is my boat was just festooned with this stuff. And my boat survived. My boat survived Hurricane Isabel with no damage. Virtually every one of the other boats on my dock at this big marina, and it was just one of these long docks with slips on either side, virtually every other boat on my dock received some level of damage. Some were impaled on pilings. One went across the dock and landed on top of a Catalina that was held down by its lines and crushed. The dock was gone after the end of the storm. This is a picture of Harrington Harbor Marina. I wish I had a picture of my dock. But this is a classic one. Here's a bunch of pilings, here's a bunch of floorboards. The floorboards on my dock disappeared after about the second or third slip. Basically, it was just a bunch of pilings and a bunch of boats, and they were all beat up. They all had rash on them. You can see this kind of stuff like that. They were all beat up to death. My little boat was sitting out there. I took a dinghy out to it, started the motor. I had arrangements with the marina to go to a vacant slip. I moved my boat to the slip, and we went sailing the next weekend. It was amazing. And people, afterwards, somebody approached me and said something like, we noticed, I said something like, yeah, you know, I didn't have any damage with my boat. Some guy looked at me and said, yes, we all noticed. Okay, they were all upset about this. The junker boat, which I sold for $500 because Carmel will get you if you don't. That's my little story about Isabel. And I just want to offer, the idea is to think outside the box. The idea is use your imagination. Think about where the boat is going to go and what you're going to need to do to control it. Some places you're not going to be able to control it, like that in between low and high water. It's just up for grabs, folks. That's what the fenders are for. Okay, but it's important to kind of get a sense of what's going to happen so you can prepare for it. So with that, if there are any questions, that's great. If not, Larry?
How have a question.
Yes.
So how do you, if you're a responsible boat owner and you go and you do all this stuff, how do you prepare your boat for maybe the people in the slips next to you that are not
Insurance.
involved and, or just, you just,
Choose your neighbors as well as you can.
Yeah.
I was fortunate, my marina that I was in Harrington Harbor, didn't have any derelict boats in it. And virtually everybody that was on the pier would come to the boat when the weather was gonna be bad. But as we all know, we see marinas all over the place, where boats are there and nobody has touched them in years. Okay, and that's where perhaps the marina operator has some interest in that. I'm gonna pass that to you, sir. Larry, thank you.
Okay, my name is Larry Strauss. I'm a licensed master captain. I've been a marine surveyor for 46 years and have owned recreational boats for 55 years. And I've moored them in every marina, Orleans, Municipal, South Shore, and currently in Prieto. I've been in Prieto for about 24 years now. Up until 2019, I had a 35-foot Freedom moored in slip 127 at Prieto Marina. Now I have a 29-foot Back Cove power boat, so I went to stink pot from sailing. I got tired of pulling sheets. Anyway, during Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, which were both back-to-back, I had 440 claims between Florida and Texas of recreational craft. Let me tell you how I moored my boat at Prieto Marina, slip 127 in Hurricane Katrina. If you know, Katrina came, and right after, adjacent to it was Rita. So the water levels came in Katrina into Prieto, and I'm in the slip in 100 section. They have a 200 section and 300 section. Currently, the 100 section has pilings that are about, there's 2, 4, 6 in most slips. And there's a finger pair between, and most of those pilings are about 8 feet high above the normal water level. Along the bulkhead at the back, the pilings are about 4 to 5 feet above the normal water level. In the 200 section currently, the pilings are about 10 feet high, and that area has been redone within the last few years. So, and that section is further up the bayou, gets less storm surge. And then the 300 section is all the way up in the bayou, and it gets minimal storm surge. I had my boat up there during one storm. I know it got about 3 foot of surge up there. So anyway, during Katrina and Rita, we had 8 foot in the 100 section. Like I say, I had 35-foot Freedom, weighs about 28,000 pounds. And I personally like my boat backed in, stern to. So I had a stern to, but 90% of the boats are bow in. So the way I tell you the mooring part, it's very similar for both bow in and stern to. The first thing I did when I came out to secure it, which was well before the storm got there, by the way. Always make sure you do it well before, because that water starts coming up. Before you realize it, that water starts coming up in there from the storm surge that's coming in from the Gulf. The first thing I did when I got there was I went down and made the hull watertight. That means closing all valves, all my ball valves, making sure all the hatches were closed and tight, all the port lights closed and tight. Then I made sure again, like the bilge pump, make sure that my batteries were topped up and the bilge pump operated properly. And then I took the power cord off, because normally what happens in the 100 section is that storm surge comes up there and knocks out the power pretty quickly. So you don't need to get your power cord wet as well. So you take it up, put it in the boat. Take all the sails off the boat, all the canvas, anything that can be blown away, take it off and put it below. That includes roller furlers. During Katrina, there was quite a few roller furling jibs out there that were just shredded. So take the roller furler off. I did not have a roller furler. I had a self-tending jib that I took that down along with the boom and put it in the cabin. I took all the canvas off, including my bimini, went down in the cabin. All the sails went down in the cabin. All the hatch covers and the winch covers and all that in the cabin. Cinch down the main sheet, make sure it's tied off properly. And again, cinch down your halyards. And again, if you have to, tape them up so they don't bang that those fittings against the mast, which happens. When you go out there during a storm, you can hear them. Everything's dinging because they're all, the wind's blowing and giving you music. After you make the hull watertight and then get your sails down, then you want to moor it properly. In this particular instance, I had a cleat amidship on both port and starboard sides. Fortunately, I had a pilot near midship on both port and starboard sides. I took the line and did a round turn around the pilot and back to the cleat on both port and starboard sides. This way it's going to slide up, and hopefully doesn't go off the top of the pilot, although it could. So therefore, besides those lines, I still had the mooring lines to the bow, port and starboard bow, and the port and starboard stern. These are short mooring lines. The normal mooring lines I use every time I tie up. I knew they weren't going to be long enough. So I took the lines, 5/8 inch line for a 35-foot boat, and I prefer the nylon lines. Nylon has a lot more stretch than your woven lines. So I used nylon lines. They were about 35 feet long, maybe 50 foot long, a couple of them. Anyway, I took them out and I had an eye in the end of each one. Took the tail and ran it through the eye and dropped it over the short piling out there at about, when I say they're 5 foot above the normal water line, but they're only about 4 foot above the top of the bulkhead. So I dropped, like I say, I put that through with the long line, and I put it way over as far as I could across my neighbor's boats. When you do that, make sure you do not foul your neighbor's lines. If you have to, you go under his or you go over the top, whichever is most going to give you the most slack and most rise. So I put from the bow, I went over as far as I could reasonably, 35, 40 to 50 feet, and secured that line with the, where it's, the reason I run the eye or the tail through the eye and then drop it over the piling, because it'll cinch down when it goes up, and it won't come off that piling. I guarantee that. So, even the short ones, they never came off. Now, I did have my normal mooring lines. They were on there, I left them on there. I sacrificed 2 of those. 2 of them popped because they got snugged up too much, and 28,000 pounds is gonna pop those lines. So I put those, I knew I was gonna sacrifice a couple lines because of the short lead on most of your normal tie-up lines. So I had 4 long lines out, 2 from the bow, 2 from the stern, and then I put 2 long lead spring lines to try to hold the boat in position if my lines on the, that I had wrapped around the pilings up near midship came off. Then I wanted those spring lines on there to hold it. After all of that, there's one other thing I did that everybody laughed at me for. I dropped my bow anchor in the center of the channel. I put a piece of yellow tape on it in case I didn't get back and people wanted to go out and back and forth through the channel. I wanted to make sure that they saw that anchor. Then I took and put a stern anchor out, and there was, not in the channel, I had to take a sledgehammer and beat the tines into the ground so it held. And I left about 10 feet of slack in the road on that. And I made a bridle going to my stern cleats so that it pulled evenly each way. The same thing in the bow. I did not use a bridle. I used a standard my drop there, on the bow. But up there, I did not leave 10 feet of slack. I left about 6 feet of slack, because when that storm surge comes, I want that bow anchor pulling that stern away from the pilings, the short pilings back there. Anyway, that's the way I moored that boat. I never got a scratch. It went up between the pilings, and it came right back down where it was supposed to. Not a scratch. There's other boats out there impaled on pilings, up on the bank. A couple of them got loose and was banging up against the other ones. And another thing why I like to put the anchor out on the bow, I'm worried about others that don't secure their boat properly and gonna come hit my boat. So that anchor rod will kind of fend them off most of the time. Now, the Prieto Marina gave me an email. Jonathan Harder was the harbor master at the time. He sends out an email saying, remove all loose items from your vessel and properly secure your boat. I worked with attorneys for the last 10 years, and that's about all you're gonna get from a marina, because they're there to provide you a slip. They're not to tell you how to do it, how to moor your boat, or what to do. They just give you directions to do it, do your due diligence, and do it properly. Because once they tell you how to secure your boat, they accept the liability for you. Therefore, they're not going to tell you. You've got to do your own due diligence and do your own mooring arrangements. And that's about all I got.
So when you go across other boats, you have to ask to do that, to put those lines out across the other boats? Remember how you said you went to your neighbor, across to your neighbor's boat?
Yes.
You have to ask. No, I'm asking. You have to get permission to do it?
They were out there.
Okay,
Most of my neighbors were out there at the time and saw how I was doing it, so they did the same thing.
okay.
How do you feel about those little rollers that you can put around on your dock line to go up and down the pile versus what you did, of just wrapping your dock line around the pile?
I have those on now, so.
Okay, that wasn't available back then.
No, I didn't have that capability at the time, but it's a good idea. I use that now, so.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry.
And last, certainly not least, Todd?
I'm Todd Whitley. I own Pontchartrain Yacht Works. Most of you guys know who we are and where we're at. And I've got a little bit of experience with hurricane damage. I don't have good news like these guys told you. I have negative news, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So the first thing is to know, make sure you got all your phone numbers for your marina in case you need to contact them after the hurricane. Now, reality is that probably if it's a serious hurricane like Katrina or Ida, you can't reach them because there's no phone lines, and cell phones doesn't work either. But try to reach out to them after the storm has passed to get permission to go to the marina. You have a lot of safety hazards you got to be concerned about with electricity in the water, which you can't see. We've dealt with flooding at the boatyard, and you're kind of be hesitant about what you're doing. You got to make sure everything's shut off before you go in the water. It's an invisible safety hazard. Another thing to think about when you're trying to get permission to go to the storm area at your marina is know that your marina or the boatyard or wherever you're trying to get into is going to have damage. It's going to take a few days to clean up. So after Hurricane Ida, it took us 2 days before the water ever went down to where we could get to the boats, and then it took us a complete week after that to clean up the yard. Didn't have phone service. So just realize you got to be a little patient because we're going through the same thing that you're going through. And I know everybody's concerned about their boat. But be safe. If you can't reach the marina and you can't reach the boatyard or wherever your boat's at, just be safe when you go there and don't take risks. Don't step in the water not knowing if electricity's been disconnected, or there could be gasoline or propane, or there could be hazards right underneath the water that could be unsafe. So just be safe when you do go there. I know that I had my boat. I had a boat in Hurricane Sally in Palafox Marina in Pensacola, and I had it tied off properly, Hooper. But the problem is the entire floating marina gave away. So all slips in the entire Palafox Pensacola Marina actually collapsed and moved in. My boat was a boat that was farthest inside the marina, but it all collapsed on my boat. So even if you have what he said before about a disaster occurring, it's called a disaster for a reason. Even if you tie it off properly, and I showed that all my lines were still tied to the dock. But the dock actually gave way. And so every boat in that marina pretty much was destroyed or sunk or totaled out after Hurricane Sally. And I don't know if you've been to Pensacola, Palafox, or if you know where it's at, but it's not been rebuilt. It's still wide open there. When you get there, when I went to get my boat, I tried to contact them, couldn't contact them, tried to get information, there was nobody to even talk to. So I went ahead and proceeded safely to get on my boat. Removed all my valuables from inside the boat, because even if it's locked up, we all know what's going to happen after dark, after a hurricane. So I removed everything valuable inside the boat, outside the boat. And one of the things I think is key, and Hooper mentioned it a minute ago, is I put a huge sign on my back window. I wrote my name, my email, my phone number, my cell phone number, just to make sure they could reach me if they were going to move the boats, because they'll come in and start demolition of the marina and recovery and not even tell you. And they'll be towing your boat off and charging you for it and dealing with it. And I made sure I had all that information on my boat. So make sure you cover your vessel. I had holes in my boat. Make sure you don't want rainwater or other things getting inside your boat. You may have engines may be underwater that need to be pickled. All those things need to be due, and you may have to do after a hurricane. You may have recovery efforts that you got to have. One of the things to know is your insurance company probably has money allocated for recovery. They also have money allocated for assessments, and then they have your normal insurance. So one of the key things is do know your insurance policy. I'm not saying I was well versed in mine, but I learned a lot going through that process. And they do, most any place after a hurricane is going to charge assessment charges, and we do too, for the insurance company to get an assessment or estimate for fixing the boat, because it may take 20 or 30 hours to go through every system and everything on that boat. And then you give an estimate, well, if you don't come and get the work there, you know, we're out of that time. So most all boat yards are gonna do that. And your insurance company has money allowance for all those things, as well as pickling your engines or recovering your boat. And then punch string knot works, you know, if you have a damage to your boat, call us quickly, get in line. There's a lot of boats, a lot of claims, as Larry mentioned, that's gonna happen in a short period of time. We can do your estimate, we can communicate and send that to the insurance company, and then once you get your estimate and your work done, there's gonna be surprise things that come up. And your insurance company understands that, and we'll also share with the insurance company any new things that we find when we're going through the boat. Okay?
Is there a time period, like, you know, to discover additional problems that may not be evident? You know, if you see the initial damage, okay, boat's got it, whatever, does the insurance company give you 2 weeks to figure out?
I don't know the answer to that, and every insurance company, I would tell you, is gonna be a little different. But in every case, we try to do our best to assess everything, but when you start digging into stuff, you notice something additional. It almost always occurs, and most always, insurance companies, as long as you're still getting it work done at the yard, they're gonna approve that additional funds. And we'll work with them to make sure they understand what's going on. So, once you get your estimate done, it's probably gonna take a short period of time for them to approve your estimate, as Larry would know, and then once that, you can schedule the work at the yard. And we're typically pretty busy after hurricanes, as you can imagine. So, but the quicker you get on the insurance company's notice, so contact them as quickly as possible. They should have a working phone number, so you ought to contact them immediately. It doesn't hurt, even if you don't have anything you noticed, it doesn't hurt to get an assessment done and contact your insurance company and let them know it's potential that your boat is in a hurricane zone and that you may have an issue. Okay?
I think you got one more slide.
I do.
Good.
Any questions from anything I've talked about, or? I'm gonna change from the hurricanes on my next slide. I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about something that we're looking to do. We've had the Corinthians, which has come to us every year, talking about race prep. And I've had a couple other customers that talked about multiple times a year they would like to get their boat hauled out for race prep. And I want to make sure we do our due diligence and we support the sailing community here. It's very important to us. And there's probably 500 sailboats up by Hugh Castine, so it's very important to us. So what we've done, what I've started is, I want to be able to do this anytime. Not just 1 month, or not just when the Corinthians can line up 8 boats in a row. Because what happens is somebody can't make it every time. They always get left out. So I'm going to offer a sailboat prep, haul out, and wash for $12 per foot, which includes pressure washing and moving the straps. And I'm going to offer that at any time as long as you schedule it in advance. So any boat, that's a substantial discount from what we normally do. So it's $12 per foot any time of the year, as long as you schedule it, you call in advance. If the slings are open, we'll lift you out and do your wash, prep wash. Gives you a chance to check your boat a couple times a year, get your bottom cleaned. It's just a good, I think, a good support of the sailing community. I had another customer approach me about a subscription service, which I thought was a grand idea. So what I'm also going to offer is $2.50 per foot per month, and that would allow you to have 3 haul outs per year. And that saves you about $150 more than the $12 per foot per haul out. So what it does is get you on the list all year long to get your boat hauled out at least 3 times a year. So if you want to sign up for either of those, again, if you want a $12 haul out and wash, you can just call and schedule it. If you want to do the subscription service, you can contact us for that as well. But that gives every sailboat owner, which is power boaters, they get their boat hauled out when they get a bottom job. You know, sailboaters need a clean bottom. It makes a big difference, especially if you're racing in the Caribbeans. Any questions about that?
Like to hear it.
Good. Yeah, I think it's something that we haven't done, and I want to make sure we do from now on. It's always you know what it's going to cost you, right? It's not something that's a question every time you call. Okay? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, John.
I got one more thing if you don't mind.
Please. Yes, sir.
Very brief.
Okay.
One other thing, after you secure your boat, for the insurance underwriters, take a little video or photographs, so you can present it to them. And they answer the question about if you find something additional on the boat after you get in the boat yard for damages, all the underwriters I've worked for are aware that there always are going to be obscured details on the boat, and there may be additional damage. So they all are
That's
aware.
expected.
Thank you, Larry. So, again, it's all about knowing what to expect, and this is our last slide, so everybody can take a break. And I'm not going to read through it, but you can see the various things that we're worried about, things like surge and wind and waves, rainfall and tornadoes. Every storm is going to be different. Isabel was a low wind, high storm surge. Harvey in Texas was moderate wind, somewhat of a storm surge, 54 inches of rain in 24 hours. That's the bugaboo. And every storm is different. So you need to understand what the physics are of the storm you're dealing with, so you can then deal with that physics, deal with those challenges. Any questions from anybody?
Adele has something she wants.
Adele?
So if you do not own your boat, I have a friend that can help you with that. My buddy Jerry Pepper is an experienced attorney, and he has asked me to tell everybody that he's doing some complicated ones that have been passed along. But he did 350 boats after Katrina, straightening out the title issues. So if you have a really random title issue, you bought a boat from a guy that bought a boat from a guy that died, and then he got it from Alabama, like Jerry's your man. So he's really reasonable, and he can find a bunch of different ways to do it. So if you don't own your vessel, now would be a good time to do that, and I will send you
Yeah,
to
but if you
Jerry.
paid for it, but you don't have
If you-
proper paperwork.
Right, if you paid for it and you know, it's
What-
yours. And,
What's Sherry's last name?
Pepper, Pepper. So great guy, lots of, a historian, he's super cool, but he wanted me to mention that.
Great.
So I will send all of that to you.
That's great. Yes, sir.
I do have a success story from Katrina. I had a 36-foot Pearson in Slidell, and it was one of 3 boats that survived in that small little marina there. And what I wish I had had this seminar before that event. I studied a lot, and I ended up, by chance, doing a lot of what you described here. But the thing that I didn't hear, that I'm gonna tell you, is that it took all day. I mean, so don't think you can go in and in a couple of hours get all this stuff done. It took me all day long, and you know, I lived in Baton Rouge. The reason the boat survived is I lived in Baton Rouge, and I had time to go do that. Everybody else was worried about their houses in Slidell. And so, you know, remember, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I want to say, Bill, that's a good point, because I have a new boat too, and I've never taken off the stack back. So, you know, if you've never done that, or if you have a new one installed, it could be time consuming. So learn how to do that way before a hurricane is actually coming down the road.
Well done. Any other questions or comments before we break for the evening? Not hearing any? Thank you. Appreciate your attention.
Great job.